sa spade, ladahan na Eilean for sa kanag naman, itangar sin siya ikamhanuna for.
Bonds of Destiny in the Highlands. A love tested by fate and forged in fire. Anya Lysander. Epigraph. It is more honorable to fail with the truth than to triumph with a lie. Sophocles. Love and hate are branches of the same tree, and their roots entwine in the heart. Scottish proverb. Summary. Gregor MacKenzie has dedicated his life to serving his clan, but neither time nor war has managed to erase the scar left by the only woman he ever loved. Eilidh MacLeod betrayed him with cruel words and abandoned him without looking back, leaving a hatred in his heart as deep as the love he once felt for her. Years later, a letter from King James summons him to Eilean Donan Castle alongside the leaders of other clans. Gregor suspects the king has plans for them, but nothing could prepare him for what is to come. Eilidh has been chosen as his wife by royal decree. Forced into a marriage neither of them understands, Gregor's resentment clashes with a desire he thought long dead. As they battle their own feelings and the looming threat that lurks in the shadows, they must decide whether their love is a battlefield or a chance to rise from the ashes. In a game of power, betrayal and uncontrollable passion, Gregor and Eilidh will learn that the past never stays buried, and that love may be the most dangerous war of all. Will they overcome the weight of betrayal, or will they destroy each other before uncovering the truth? Prologue. Eilean Castle, 1568, on the shores of Loch Ness. Gregor MacKenzie's imposing muscular figure stood out against the shadows cast by the nearby trees. Night had fallen over Eilean Castle more than half an hour ago, and he had used the commotion and drunkenness of many to slip away from the celebration unnoticed. The castle's laird, a man of fierce character and little mercy, had decided to celebrate his birthday with great pomp, gathering much of the village. But Gregor wasn't there for him, or for the party. His mind could focus on only one person, Eilidh MacLeod. For as long as he could remember, he had loved her, the most beautiful, sweet, and generous woman he had ever known. For years he had watched her from afar, dreaming of a future by her side, until she finally confessed that she loved him too. But there was one obstacle between them: Hamish MacLeod, Eilidh's father, who was fiercely opposed to their relationship. That was why Gregor stood there that night, on the wooden bridge crossing the river near the castle, hidden from prying eyes. His blue gaze drifted over the calmly flowing water, soothing his anxiety as he waited for his beloved. Running a hand through his tousled black hair, he picked up a stone and tossed it into the river. A smile played on his lips, as he imagined Eilidh making her way through the trees to reach him. His body reacted at the thought of kissing her again. For all the saints, he loved her. Minutes passed, and worry began to creep into his chest. Tavish and Ronan, his friends, had promised to keep Eilidh's family distracted so she could slip away and meet him, but he was starting to fear something had gone wrong. However, a soft cough behind him pulled him from his thoughts. He turned immediately, his face breaking into a smile as he saw her. A moonbeam illuminated Eilidh's sweet features, and Gregor's heart pounded as she stepped toward him. When she wrapped her slender arms around him, he pulled her close with devotion. "I thought this moment would never come," Eilidh whispered against his chest. Gregor slid a hand down her back, caressing her gently. "I was starting to think Tavish and Ronan wouldn't pull it off," he murmured, his voice rough as he leaned in, his breath grazing the skin of her neck. "You look beautiful tonight." Eilidh let out a nervous giggle, and pressed herself closer to him. She had chosen her finest dress, the deep green velvet one with delicate embroidery and blue lace at the neckline. A corset hugged her torso, accentuating the curves Gregor admired with reverence. "Thank you," she whispered, tilting her head slightly as Gregor tangled his fingers in her blonde hair, which cascaded in soft waves down her back. "My father hardly took his eyes off me tonight. He knows you're here." Gregor sighed in frustration. He would never understand why Hamish MacLeod was so determined to keep them apart. Even so, you won't stop us from being together, he said, cupping her face in his hands, taking a moment to admire her. She was so beautiful. Her blue eyes shone with love, her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her lips trembled slightly. Gregor brushed them with his own before kissing her tenderly. When they parted, Eilean sighed and took a step back, her gaze turning toward the river, troubled. I overheard a conversation this morning, Gregor. He frowned and stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. My father is planning to marry me off to a distant cousin, from my mother's clan. Murray. Gregor's heart stopped. He pulled away, his expression incredulous as he grasped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. What? Do you want this? No, she denied instantly. I love you, Gregor. I don't even know this cousin they spoke of. But my father thinks you're a bad influence on me. He wants me to marry a farmer or a merchant, someone who doesn't live by the sword. Gregor let out a frustrated huff, pacing back and forth before suddenly stopping in front of her with determination. Then let's get married. What? Eilean asked in surprise. Or we can run away. Anything, as long as we can be together. Eilean stepped closer, clutching his shirt, feeling the warmth of his body beneath the thick fabric. She knew that with Gregor, she would never feel the fear her father instilled in her. You're mad, Gregor MacKenzie. Mad for you, Eilean. Before she could reply, a cold voice interrupted them. I would never accept Gregor MacKenzie into my family. They both turned abruptly. In the dim light, the imposing silhouette of Eilidh MacLeod loomed with unforgiving rigidity. Eilean trembled. Gregor felt her fear, and tightened his grip on her hand before stepping forward to face the man determined to keep them apart. Go back to the castle, Eilidh ordered his daughter coldly. Now. The night suddenly felt darker. Gregor sighed, turned his head toward Eilean, and gave a barely perceptible nod. The young woman stepped away toward the castle, but not before casting him one last pleading glance. He only smiled at her carelessly, and held her gaze until she disappeared into the shadows of the night. You intend to ruin my family, don't you? Eilidh asked coldly. Gregor arched an eyebrow but remained silent. From what I understand, your forge doesn't bring in much profit, he commented with irony. That's why I want my daughter to marry someone wealthy, not you. Gregor scoffed and shook his head. Your daughter should marry whomever she chooses because she, not you, will be the one living with that person. But if he has money, all the better. What can you offer her? Days of solitude, suffering as she wonders whether you're still alive or if you've died. Or will you offer her an early widowhood? Have you even considered that if she marries you, and you die in battle, she will have nothing to live on? I don't want that. I don't want you near her. You are nothing, just a mere warrior who made a name for himself by being friends with the laird's son. Nothing more. Stay away from my family, or I will have to inform the laird. And you know how severe his punishments are. Eilidh walked away without giving him a chance to respond, but what could he have said? Gregor began to feel miserable. He had chosen the path of a warrior years ago because it was what he had wanted, but now, it was precisely that choice that kept him from Eilean. He loved her as he had never thought he could love anyone, and he would do anything for her, yet Eilidh's words echoed in his mind. What could he truly offer Eilean if he died in battle? A deep pain began to grow in his chest, tightening and wounding him to his core. Eilean's eyes, before vanishing into the night, had begged him to rescue her from the hell she lived in. And Gregor swore to himself, as he furiously threw a stone into the river, that he would do whatever it took to get her out of there as soon as possible. Eilean's conflict. A heart torn between duty and desire is like a ship in a storm, sooner or later it must choose its course. Anonymous. The next morning, Gregor was training with his companions in the castle courtyard. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the image of Eilean saying goodbye with tears in her eyes. All night he had considered asking Tavish for money so he could run away with her, hoping to repay him once he found land to start anew. But he hadn't dared to ask, especially when in the morning he saw his friend's bruised face, probably from another beating from his father. "Where's your head at, Gregor?" Ronan asked, approaching him. "I don't even know, my friend." Ronan clapped him on the back and grinned. "That girl has you under a spell," he teased, referring to Eilidh. Gregor smirked and gave him a light shove. "You'd wish to have a woman like her by your side."
"No doubt about that, my friend."
They laughed as they sheathed their swords at the end of their training, but then they spotted Tavish running toward them. He had just returned from the village, accompanying his father on a visit, and when his friends saw his worried expression, they hurried to meet him. The dark gaze of the future laird locked onto Gregor, and before he even spoke, Gregor knew something was wrong. "They're leaving, Gregor." "Who?" "Eilidh and her family." Gregor's face turned pale immediately. Tavish pointed to his own horse. "Go. I'll cover for you before my father notices you're gone." Gregor nodded and sprinted toward his friend's horse. He mounted it in a rush, and rode desperately toward the village. He had little time to convince Eilidh to stay with him. Or perhaps this would be the last day he ever saw her. But that couldn't be. He couldn't say goodbye to her like this. What could have happened for Hamish to suddenly decide to leave, abandoning his forge and his life in the village? How were they going to survive? He spurred the horse urgently, and headed straight for Eilidh's house. When he arrived, he saw his beloved climbing into a carriage, her family's belongings already loaded inside. His heart clenched at the sight, powerless to stop it. "Eilidh!" he shouted, leaping off the horse before it had even come to a full stop. Gregor ran toward the carriage just as Hamish stepped out of the house with his wife. "Gregor!" Eilidh whispered, a mix of surprise, plea and fear in her voice. "What are you doing here, boy?" Hamish asked with disdain. "I heard you're leaving the village." "Why?" Hamish scoffed and shoved him aside. "I owe you no explanations." Gregor turned to Eilidh and with determination proposed. "Eilidh can stay with me if she doesn't want to leave." Gregor felt his heart pounding in his chest, in rhythm with the rattling of the carriage that was taking Eilidh away. The morning air smelled of iron and damp earth, but the only scent lingering in his nose was hers, a fragrance that had been his refuge until now. But he had no refuge left. "Do you see now, boy?" Hamish's voice was a dagger to his pride, condescending and cruel. "My daughter knows what's best for her, if she wants even a modestly comfortable life. She understands what she must do." Gregor didn't take his eyes off Eilidh's silhouette, motionless in the carriage, her back turned to him.
"What did you do to make her change her mind overnight?"
His voice was rough, barely a whisper drowned by restrained fury. Hamish shrugged with that smug smile that made Gregor's blood boil. "Nothing. She thought better of it during the night, because she knows what's best for her. It's not my fault you let yourself be fooled by a woman, boy. My daughter already told you, you were nothing more than a passing fancy to her, so stop insisting. We're leaving the village, and for your own sake, I hope you don't follow us or try to contact Eilidh again." A hollow feeling settled in Gregor's stomach, a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. Eilidh couldn't have changed so quickly. Something in the way she had said goodbye, in the stiffness of her body, told him it was a forced lie. But he had no chance to find out. Driven by desperation, he took a step forward, a silent attempt to reach her, but Hamish was faster. The blade of his dagger flashed in the morning light, before slashing Gregor's skin just below his right ear. A sharp searing pain shot through his face, and stumbling, he pressed a hand to the wound, feeling the warm blood trickling down his neck, seeping into the folds of his shirt. The carriage started moving. The sound of hooves striking the earth blended with the ringing in his ears. His fists clenched tightly, but his legs refused to move. From where he stood, he watched as Hamish climbed onto the carriage and took the reins with practiced ease. Eilidh, however, remained still. Gregor held his breath, waiting for her to turn to give him one last look, a gesture that would confirm it was all a lie. But she didn't. She stayed upright, her face hidden from his view. A gust of wind lifted her dress and untied a ribbon, which fluttered to the ground as if fate itself had left him a final trace of her. Gregor stared at it, his entire world collapsing around him. He bent down and picked up the piece of fabric with a trembling hand, clutching it so tightly his knuckles turned white. His gaze returned to Eilidh's fading figure in the distance. His heart cried out for vengeance. His mind urged him to forget. But Gregor knew he could do neither. Because she was taking a part of him with her, a part he would never get back. Honor had been his guide, the sword with which he had carved his destiny. But love was a ghost that refused to die. They had taught him that a warrior must never bow to desire, that betrayal was repaid with oblivion, and loyalty with sacrifice. But what happened when punishment and longing became one? He watched her disappear, he let her go, and with every step she took he felt a piece of himself vanish into the mist of the Highlands. Perhaps his duty was to conquer her in his memory, to erase her from his blood. But how could one kill something that still beat inside the very soul? Chapter 1. The love of a Highlander is like the wind on the hills, untamed, fierce and eternal. Scottish legend. Scotland, 1574. Eilidh felt a knot tighten in her stomach as her father's words sank in. Her mind began to wander, desperately trying to make sense of the crushing news that had just fallen upon her like a boulder. "For what?" she repeated, struggling to keep her voice steady, though her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. Hamish looked at her with his usual severity, the kind she had learned to fear since childhood. Her father had never been a patient man, least of all with her. He took a deep breath before speaking, his tone as firm and unyielding as ever. "The king has summoned certain trusted men to a meeting. Something important is taking shape, and my presence has been requested," he declared, a glint of pride in his eyes. Eilidh nodded slightly, not daring to interrupt. She knew her father's explanations were never given freely. Every word he spoke concealed intentions that would reveal themselves sooner or later. "And I have decided that you will come with me," he added, his gaze fixed on her. Her heart lurched. Those words caught her completely off guard. Her mother, seated silently by the fireplace, lowered her gaze, unwilling to intervene. "Why?" Eilidh asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. She knew her father never acted without purpose. If he wanted her to accompany him, there had to be a reason beyond a simple meeting. Hamish smirked, that unsettling knowing smile that always sent a chill through her. "Because it is time for you to fulfill your duty," he said in a tone that left no room for argument. A shiver ran down Eilidh's spine. He didn't need to explain further for her to understand what he meant. She had escaped her fate once, but now it seemed that misfortune had finally caught up with her.
This wasn't just about traveling with him.
Her father had other plans. "Father," she murmured, but Hamish cut her off with a raised hand.
"There is nothing more to discuss.
We leave at dawn. Prepare yourself." Her heart pounded violently against her ribs as she watched him rise from his seat and stride toward the door, his imposing presence filling the room. Her mother remained silent, her face hidden in the dim light, but the trembling of her hands betrayed her helplessness. Eilidh stood frozen in the center of the room, feeling an invisible net closing in around her. The weight of both past and future pressed down on her shoulders, and despair began to take root in her chest. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to be just another pawn in her father's games.
But she knew she had no choice.
Chapter 2. The loyalty of a heart is harder to win than victory in battle. Highland wisdom. Gregor swirled the liquid in his cup for the umpteenth time, not having taken a single sip. His mind drifted far away, so lost in thought that the motion had become automatic. From the window of the small room where he usually met with Tavish, he watched the clan members go about their day, though he wasn't truly seeing them. Anyone who knew him would think he was hiding, and they wouldn't be wrong. The weight of the letter in his sporran was a constant reminder of the reason for his unease. Ever since he had read it that morning, he had chosen to isolate himself. No doubt, Tavish was already searching for him to train, but for the first time he had no desire to go. A sound behind him made him look up. The door creaked open, and there stood Tavish. Despite his imposing presence and the reputation of a demon that many attributed to him, his eyes held a tenderness reserved only for his daughter. With a sigh he shut the door behind him and stepped forward, regarding Gregor with a scrutinizing gaze. "When Lilias told me she had seen you looking far too serious, I thought she must have mistaken you for someone else," he remarked in his deep voice. "But I see she was right. Something must be terribly wrong for you to be here, alone drinking." Gregor smirked and gestured toward the untouched cup on the nearby table. Tavish picked it up and filled it slowly before stepping closer. His sharp eyes studied him, taking in the square jaw covered with days-old stubble. "Are you going to tell me what's troubling you, or will I have to use my demonic powers to force it out of you?" he joked before taking a sip. Gregor let out a short laugh and drank as well, then countered with his own question. "Did you come here to talk to me, or are you just escaping your wife and daughter?" Tavish clicked his tongue and glanced aside, amusement flickering in his gaze. "Both." Gregor laughed again, but Tavish's next question nearly wiped the smile from his face. "Are you dodging the subject to avoid answering me, or is it just my imagination?" Gregor sighed, giving in. "It's true. I'm trying to avoid talking about it. I received a letter from the king this morning." "From James? Do you know another?" he shot back with sarcasm before his expression darkened again. "And the truth is, I don't know what to make of his summons. I don't want to fight, not now that—" He stopped short, cursing himself internally for the slip. He had nearly mentioned Ronan. The betrayal of the man who had once been his friend still weighed on him like a perpetual shadow. With a grim expression, he pulled the letter from his sporran and handed it to Tavish, who read it in silence. When he finished, he let out a slow breath. "Perhaps he called you because of the conflicts between some of the clans," he murmured thoughtfully. "Do you think it's for battle?" Gregor shrugged and took another drink. "I don't know. It's unclear." Tavish pondered for a moment. "If it were for war, the letter would have been addressed to me. Perhaps it's something else." Gregor scoffed and began pacing the room. "And then there's Ian McRae. Could he have something to do with this? Maybe the king just chose his castle at random." Gregor shook his head. "Something serious must be happening for him to welcome warriors who aren't exactly his allies into his clan." Tavish stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Calm down, my friend. Don't trouble yourself too much." He sighed, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "I know I'm not Ronan, and I don't have his way with words, but you know I'm here for whatever you need." Gregor scoffed and took a step back. "Why won't you talk about him?" Silence stretched between them. Finally Gregor burst out. "Because he betrayed us, and I didn't see it coming." Tavish gave him a sad smile and gripped his shoulders. "And you've been carrying that burden ever since?" Gregor clenched his jaw. "I'm supposed to be your best warrior. I was meant to protect you and Lilias, and Ronan nearly managed to harm you both." "No one saw it coming, Gregor," Tavish murmured. "No one could have imagined he had spent years waiting just to betray us. He wasn't a sane man." Gregor looked away. "Since then, I feel like I'm not a good warrior." Tavish frowned. "Those are Eilidh's words. Are you really going to let what she said dictate your life?" Then, resting a hand on the back of Gregor's neck, he brought their foreheads together. "You are the best man I know. And no one will change my mind. Now go out there and prove it. And while you're at it, help me with my daughter, she's driving me mad." Gregor let out a hearty laugh, and for the first time that day, he felt his burden lighten just a little. Hamish approached her with a stern expression, and handed her a letter. Even before her father spoke, Eilidh felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that nothing good could come from this. "We have received a letter from King James," he said, his voice harsh, leaving no room for objection. "In it, He urges you and other young women your age to join him and some of his warriors in marriage, with the intention of further uniting the clans. Eilidh felt the air leave her lungs. Her trembling hands clenched the folds of her dress, as a wave of anguish swept over her. "Marriage?" she asked in a whisper. Her heart pounded, and the memory of her first marriage struck her with the force of a storm. "I was already married once, father, to a man who died under strange circumstances. I have no desire to go through that again." Hamish frowned, irritated by her response. "The king is not asking if you wish to marry. He is ordering you to heed his call, and accept one of his warriors as your husband." Indignation flared inside her like a wildfire. She looked at her father, then at her mother, who as always remained silent. "And you are willing to send me away just like that?" she snapped, fury seething in her voice. "He is the king," Hamish declared, crossing his arms. "We cannot defy him, only obey." A bitter laugh bubbled up in Eilidh's throat. "Obey? Years ago you refused to let me marry the only man I ever loved, just because he was a warrior. You forced me to lie to him, to say horrible things. And now you force me to marry one." Hamish's gaze darkened, and in the blink of an eye the slap echoed through the room. Eilidh pressed a hand to her cheek, where the sting spread like fire, but it wasn't the pain of the strike that hurt the most. It was what it meant. To her father, she was nothing more than a pawn in the game of clan alliances. Years ago he had stolen her chance at happiness, and now, he was casting her into an uncertain fate without a second thought. "You will answer the king's call and marry whomever he decides," Hamish declared, his voice implacable. "If you refuse, I will lock you in a convent for life, and you won't even be allowed to step outside for air." Tears welled in Eilidh's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned to her mother, who merely lowered her gaze, saying nothing. A sharp pang of disappointment struck her. There was no support. No escape. "You can strike me all you want, father, but that won't change what I think of you," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You have no honor. Your principles shift to suit your needs, and for that they are worthless." Hamish stepped forward again, gripping her arms with bruising force. Eilidh felt his fingers dig into her flesh, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing her wince. She met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "You're lucky you're leaving for Eilean Donan tomorrow," her father growled, "because otherwise I would make you pay for your insolence. I don't want the king to see bruises on your body." Eilidh lifted her chin in defiance. "Of course. You wouldn't want him to discover that you're a brute." Hamish's eyes blazed with fury. He inhaled sharply, forcing himself to rein in his temper, and released her abruptly. Without another glance at her, he turned on his heel. "Go prepare your trunk. Torquil and Ewan will escort you to the castle, and return once you are safely with the king and Ian McCrae." Safe, Eilidh thought bitterly. They weren't offering her safety, only a different kind of prison. Without another word she left the room, her heart heavy. She wondered what kind of man had been chosen for her this time. In her mind she pictured a warrior with a cruel face and a body scarred from battle. Surely it would be someone no one could love, why else would they sacrifice her? With determined steps, she walked out to the garden and sank onto a bench by the entrance. Feeling the curious gazes of the men who worked for her father, she lowered her head. Finally she let the tears flow freely. She had suppressed her pain and rage for too long. She thought of Gregor, the MacKenzie warrior, who had been the love of her life. Years ago, her father had forced her to abandon him and marry another. Had Gregor found someone who made him happy? But at that moment, her thoughts didn't matter. Her fate was sealed once again, and escaping wouldn't be easy. There was only one thing left to do: pray. She lifted her gaze to the sky and begged that for once in her life, someone would see her as more than just a chess piece in the game of power. Chapter 3. Desire is a raging river. You can fight the current or let yourself be carried away, but you can never ignore it. Ancient saying. After more than 4 days of near constant travel, Gregor let out a long sigh as he sank onto the soft mattress of the bed Ian MacRae had prepared for him in his castle. Though his body welcomed the relief of rest, his mind remained restless. He regretted not being able to see Ian upon his arrival. A servant had informed him that his friend was busy resolving a conflict between several of the king's warriors, and couldn't leave until tensions had eased. He glanced around and smiled. His friend had never had an interest in decoration, and the castle reflected his austere, practical nature. The rooms lacked tapestries, paintings, or anything that might make them more inviting. Ian always said that embellishing spaces was a woman's concern, a gender he had despised ever since a woman had broken his heart years ago. Gregor shifted his gaze to the small bundle of belongings he had brought with him, just a few changes of clothes and an extra pair of boots. Lilius had insisted he take more, but he had refused. He didn't plan on staying long at Eilean Donan. He longed to return to the shores of Loch Ness as soon as possible. Though he had kept his composure throughout the journey, now that he was here, a faint sense of unease crept over him. He wanted to see the king as soon as possible, or at least Ian, to learn the reason for his summons. The servants had told him that the other summoned warriors had arrived before him, and he was eager to reunite with his friends and battle companions. With a sigh, he got up and approached the narrow window of his chamber. From there, he could see several of the king's warriors walking through the gardens, and the servants tending to the nearby fields. He observed the serious expressions of the soldiers, and wondered if they feared an attack on the castle, given the king's presence. The thought put him on high alert. He vowed not to part with his weapons while he was there. He couldn't stand staying inside any longer. He would go out and find his friends. It didn't take him long to spot the master of the castle. "The MacKenzie dragon," Ian exclaimed with a grin before pulling him into a strong embrace.
"It's been too long."
Gregor smiled, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder as they pulled apart. "Far too long. Long enough that no one calls me dragon anymore." Ian let out a hearty laugh. "They should do it more often. I still remember the terror in your enemies' eyes when they used those nicknames among themselves. You could have chosen one for yourself." Ian clicked his tongue and grimaced. "I liked Demon, but your laird took it first." "He was quicker to claim it," Gregor replied with a smirk. They walked slowly down the corridor, catching up after so much time apart. "I'm sorry I couldn't receive you properly," Ian apologized with a sigh. "There were a few clashes between our guests, and I couldn't leave until things settled." Gregor grinned mischievously.
"Let me guess, Angus and Finlay."
Ian chuckled, and clapped him on the back. "You know them well. They don't seem to get along with Lachlan Drummond." Gregor snorted. "They're here too. Among others. You know they're among the king's closest men."
"Then it's bound to be an eventful meeting."
"You can say that again. I still don't know why you were called," Ian lowered his voice, "but considering the other guests, I have an idea." Gregor frowned and stopped halfway down the stairs. "And are you going to tell me?" Ian raised his hands. "God forbid. If it's what I think, it'll be the king who confirms it, not me. By the way, I was surprised to hear you came alone. Where's Ronan? Did you leave him at the shores of Loch Ness?" Gregor's smile vanished, and his expression hardened. "Ronan died almost 2 years ago," he stated coldly. "He turned out to be a traitor and nearly killed Tavish and his wife." A flicker of sorrow and regret crossed Ian's face. "I'm sorry, my friend. I didn't mean to be rude. I had no idea. So little news reaches us here." Gregor shrugged and tried to relax his expression. "Have you seen the others?"
"Yes.
I believe they're all in a room in the East Wing, as far away from the king's warriors as possible. The meeting with James is later, if you want to speak with them beforehand." Gregor nodded in farewell, and headed off to find his friends. As he walked through the corridors, the nervousness that had gripped him eased slightly. After so long, he would be with them again, just like in the old days. The sound of boots echoed through the grand stone hall as the men entered and took their places. Gregor's gaze fixed on Ian, who was watching them with amusement. He realized his friend was barely containing a smile beneath his thick beard, but the glint in his eyes gave him away. The group of warriors halted when they reached their destination, Gregor at the front. Broderick, Dougal, Angus, Finlay and Callum lined up beside him. He could see the tension on their faces, the same nervous anticipation he himself felt about the information they were about to receive. He shifted his focus, and saw that the king's closest men were also present: Lachlan Drummond, Graham Fraser, Alistair Buchanan and Fergus Hamilton. They hailed from the lowlands, and everyone knew they looked down on the northern warriors, whom they considered savages. James cleared his throat and rose to his feet, immediately drawing everyone's attention. "Gentlemen, I have just informed the Lord of Eilean Donan of the reason I have summoned you to this neutral territory." Gregor exhaled, irritated. The king's slow, deliberate speech tested his patience. He forced himself to swallow his frustration and kept his gaze locked on him. "As I have witnessed firsthand in this very castle just hours ago, the disputes between the lairds of various clans persist." His eyes landed directly on Angus, who remained unfazed, as if the remark had nothing to do with him. James raised an eyebrow, both amused and surprised. "You are among the finest warriors who fought alongside my predecessor with bravery, ferocity, and determination to secure the long-awaited peace in our land, and I have come to the conclusion that my father never rewarded you for it." Gregor frowned. "That is not necessary," Callum interjected. "We did it willingly." "Even so, I wish to do it," the king replied. Gregor tried to guess what was coming. He assumed James would grant them land, as was customary, but nothing could have prepared him for the king's next words. "I have looked into your lives and know that you are alone, that no woman awaits your return. That is why I have summoned you, to introduce you to your future wives." Silence fell over the hall. Gregor stared at him, waiting for the king to burst into laughter, to reveal it was all a joke. But James's face showed no sign of humor. His eyes sought out Ian, who was barely suppressing his laughter at the stunned expressions of his friends, not to mention the mocking looks from the king's warriors, who relished their obvious discomfort. Several minutes passed before anyone reacted. Gregor exchanged glances with the others, searching their faces for confirmation that they had misheard. The tension in the hall was almost unbearable. Finally, Gregor cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Forgive me, my lord, what did you say?" "Exactly what you heard, Mackenzie." Gregor blinked several times, searching for the right words. But his shock was so great that for a moment, he was tempted to turn and walk out of the room. "We don't need wives, my lord." James let out a soft chuckle. "I know you can manage on your own, but this is not just a reward. It is also an alliance between your clans and theirs."
"But," Roderick began to protest. "No but, Sinclair.
"I have gathered you here to introduce you to your betrothed." Angus scoffed in disdain, but James paid him no mind. "And who might they be?" he asked sarcastically, gesturing toward the king's warriors. Alistair Buchanan laughed. "You're not my type, Stuart. I prefer them with more tits." Angus smirked wickedly. "And I prefer them well placed." Alistair took a step forward, his fury igniting, but Fergus placed a hand on his shoulder to calm him. James intervened before the situation could escalate. "Easy, gentlemen. We are not here to fight. Tonight a banquet will be held in honor of the future husbands, but before that, each of you will meet your intended." The warriors exchanged glances. Some exhaled almost imperceptibly, while others hardened their expressions to mask their fury at the imposition of an unwanted marriage. "Don't make those faces," the king remarked, noticing the rigidity in their expressions. "They will be women to your liking. And now, if you'll excuse me, I ask Lord Mackenzie to present himself in this hall in half an hour." Gregor clenched his fists. Why did he have to be the first? He swallowed his frustration and nodded out of respect. As he watched the king leave, he couldn't help but think that he would have much preferred a good battle over being forced into marriage. Chapter 4. The fire of love and that of resentment burn with equal intensity, but only one gives warmth while the other consumes. Scottish proverb. Gregor had just endured the worst half-hour of his life. Ever since Eilean had left the hall with her friends, seeking fresh air after the terrible news of her impending marriage, he had oscillated between shock, anger, and denial. Like the others, he had resisted James's order again and again, but after speaking with Ian, he understood that refusing would bring ruin to his clan. Other warriors were eagerly awaiting an opportunity to challenge them, thirsting to settle old feuds. "Cheer up, my friend," Ian said as they walked alone toward the hall where his future wife awaited him. "I admit I suspected it when I saw that some of the guests were women, but I wasn't sure." Gregor shot him a sideways glance, frowning.
"And why the hell weren't you included?
You're our age and still single." Ian lowered his voice slightly. "Don't say that too loudly. For now I'm free." "And how did you manage that?" The other barely hid a smirk. "I insisted that if they forced me to marry, I would throw myself out of a window the very next day." Gregor let out a dry chuckle. "Good idea. I'll keep that in mind if I don't like my bride." Ian gave him an enigmatic smile. "My friend, I've seen our guests and trust me, you'll like whoever she is." Gregor snorted, unconvinced, and entered the hall muttering under his breath. James was already waiting, and when the king motioned, Ian stepped away, leaving them alone. "Are you ready to meet your future wife, Mackenzie?" The young man grimaced.
"Not really," he muttered before answering with resignation. "I suppose so."
James smiled in satisfaction and clapped his hands. "Perfect. She'll be here in a moment." Gregor glanced toward the door, hoping his betrothed had run away before they could find her. But the footsteps in the corridor told him the moment had arrived. When the door opened, Eilean couldn't help but lower her gaze. Her heart pounded so hard she feared everyone could hear it. She forced herself to step forward with unsteady steps, a knot in her stomach making it difficult to breathe properly. Finally, gathering the courage she did not possess, she lifted her gaze and saw him. First the kind eyes of the king. Then his. Her world stopped. Gregor MacKenzie. The warrior she had loved. The man she had lost 6 years ago. His expression mirrored the same astonishment. For a moment Gregor thought his eyes were deceiving him, that someone had slipped a potion into his drink, making him see ghosts from the past. But no. It was her. Eilean. Gregor felt the tremor in his hands, and how his body tensed at the wave of emotions crashing into him like a blow. The woman standing before him was not the same girl he remembered. Her body had changed, transformed into that of a slender woman with full curves. Her face, once sweet, now bore the mark of someone who had known sorrow. Her eyes, once filled with joy, were now wary and evasive. But her hair was the same, and Gregor remembered how many times he had run his fingers through it. A shudder ran down Eilean's spine under his scrutiny. Her mouth went dry, her palms sweaty. She couldn't believe it. The tall, strong man before her, his face hardened by the years, his gaze fierce, his body forged by war, couldn't be the young man she had once dreamed of sharing her life with. And yet there he was. "Are you well, Lady MacLeod?" James asked, frowning. Eilean took a deep breath, and forced her feet to move forward. She knew Gregor could see her fear. And she hated him for it.
"Yes, my lord," she lied.
James observed them with interest, sensing the tension between them. "I get the impression that you two already know each other." Gregor was the first to react. "We lived in the same village," he said firmly. A shiver ran down Eilean's spine. His voice had changed, it was deeper, more powerful. "That explains a lot. All the better."
"This wasn't such a terrible decision, was it, Mackenzie?"
Gregor refused to answer. Terrible wasn't nearly enough to describe it. "I'll leave you two alone to talk before the wedding," James said with a smile before stepping away. Eilean had spent years running, believing that distance would free her from the past. But fate was like the tides, It pulled them back to what they feared and at the same time to what they longed for most. Now he stood before her with the same eyes as before, but colder, more wounded. She wondered if there was still a trace of the man who once loved her, if she could still find refuge in his shadow, or if his sword would be the one to end her. Between them honor stood like a stone wall, and love was merely the echo of what could have been.
But was it possible to undo what fate had woven so tightly?
When the door closed, silence hung heavy in the air. "I'm surprised your father agreed to marry you off to someone like me," Gregor said coldly. Eilidh, wounded by his tone, lifted her chin with pride. "We didn't know it was you. Besides, my father owes loyalty to James." Gregor scoffed in disbelief. Eilidh was no longer the same. And if there was one thing he was sure of, it was that he had no intention of forgiving her. Not now. Gregor turned to Eilidh with an inquisitive look, his dark eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and challenge.
"What will your father say when he finds out who his daughter is marrying?" he asked, locking his gaze onto hers.
Eilidh held his stare without hesitation. "He accepted it without a second thought, so he has no right to an opinion. And no, he's not here, if that's what you're worried about." Gregor's brow instantly furrowed. "I'm not afraid of your father," he retorted sharply, as if he had been struck in the gut. He stepped closer, stopping just a meter away, feeling the tension radiating from her body. "I want to ask you for a favor. Don't write to him. Don't tell him anything. I want to see his face when he sees me arrive." Eilidh tilted her head slightly, scrutinizing his expression. "Do you resent him that much?" Gregor shrugged, feigning indifference. "I suppose we hold grudges against those who have hurt us. And the ones who hurt you are the ones who truly matter to you. In your case there's no resentment," he lied, staring into her eyes, "because you never mattered enough for me to be hurt." His words were like a dagger piercing Eilidh's heart. She tried to keep a composed expression, but the pain ran too deep, and she couldn't stop her eyes from filling with tears. Gregor hesitated for a moment. His first instinct was to go to her to tell her what he truly felt, but his pride forced him to step back and swallow his words. "We need to accept this situation as soon as possible," he said after an uncomfortable silence. Eilidh narrowed her eyes. "I thought you'd insist on asking the king to reconsider our marriage," she replied with disdain, lacing her words with venom. Gregor clicked his tongue. "Suddenly, I find myself rather willing to accept this union." "Is that what you want?" The warrior scoffed.
"I never wanted to get married.
Least of all to someone who despises what I do." Eilidh clenched her fist tightly. "I still have a few days to make you change your mind," she challenged. Gregor let out a dry laugh, a sound that sent a shiver down Eilidh's spine. She tried to mask her reaction by changing her expression. It had been so long since she'd heard that sound that for the briefest moment, the Gregor she had once known peeked through the wall of hatred that now surrounded him. Her heart pounded with the same intensity as in those years long past. "Do you find this situation amusing?" she snapped. "You have no idea how much," Gregor replied with a mocking smile. "You're about to marry the man you once scorned and humiliated." "Honestly, yes, I find it quite amusing." Eilidh clenched her jaw, forcing down her fury. "We'll see if you're still laughing in the days before the wedding," she retorted, her words carrying a silent promise of war. Gregor smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "You're right. We'll see." Eilidh strode out of the hall with unwavering steps, feeling rage consume her. The moment she crossed the castle's threshold, tears of frustration slid down her face. No matter how many times she told herself she hated him, her heart stubbornly insisted on feeling otherwise. She wandered aimlessly until she reached the garden, where the night breeze carried bitter memories. She thought of the conversation with her father before leaving the shores of Loch Ness, his threat, the cruel choice she had been forced to make. And now Gregor looked at her with contempt, unaware of the truth. "I see you're not fond of your betrothed," a female voice spoke behind her. Eilidh turned with a start. The newcomer smiled gently. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," she said. Eilidh studied her for a moment, before deciding to introduce herself. "My name is Eilidh." "I'm Cecily," the young woman replied. "I saw you leave in tears and wanted to check if you were all right." Eilidh sighed.
"It's because of my fiancé. You don't like him. Let's just say it's complicated."
Cecily gave her a knowing smile.
"At least yours has shown up."
"Mine hasn't even bothered to meet me." And for the first time in a long while, Eilidh felt a connection with someone. As the two women shared their confidences, time slipped away until night began to fall, calling them back to the castle. Chapter 5. Night fell over Eilean Donan Castle, wrapping its ancient walls in a shroud of cold shadows. The northern wind carried an icy whisper through the stone corridors, and Eilidh, seated on a bench in the garden, shivered as a chill ran down her spine. "I'm sorry I've kept you too long," she murmured, regret flickering across her face. "Don't worry. I don't know anyone here, and talking to you has been a welcome distraction," Cecily replied with a smile. Eilidh stood, lifting her gaze toward the castle, its silhouette faintly illuminated by the torches. She took a deep breath, as if trying to fill her lungs with courage. "Come on. The Laird of Eilean Donan isn't to blame for what happened between me and Gregor." Cecily linked her arm through Eilidh's, walking with her toward the great stone entrance. Just before crossing the threshold, she leaned in and whispered against her ear. "Wear your finest dress to impress him. I'm sure he won't be able to take his eyes off you." Eilidh hesitated, but seeing the determination in her new friend's eyes, she smiled and nodded. She wouldn't do it for Gregor, she told herself. She would do it for herself, to prove that neither he nor anyone else could break her. And as she made her way to her chambers, she promised herself that tonight she would shine on her own terms. Gregor MacKenzie wouldn't be able to look away. After a dinner where he could barely take a bite, Gregor had retreated to a corner of the hall, a glass of whiskey in hand. The lively chatter of his friends reached him as a distant murmur, but his mind was elsewhere. From his chamber window, he had seen her in the gardens with another young woman, crying. And he would have given anything to know what they had been talking about. "At least your betrothed showed up," Callum grumbled beside him. "Mine stayed behind to watch over her mother's body." Dougal snorted, downing his drink. "I almost would have preferred yours. Mine nearly fainted when she saw me." Broderick laughed, slapping his back. "Imagine her face when she sees you naked." Laughter rang through the hall until Angus's voice rose above the noise with a complaint. "At least yours didn't have a dagger at her belt." Callum let out a mocking laugh.
"She'll probably slit your throat the moment you fall asleep."
Finley clicked his tongue and leaned back in his seat.
"That's nothing.
Mine already tried to cut my balls off. In front of the king." Dougal's roaring laughter drew a few looks, but Gregor's silence didn't go unnoticed. Broderick tilted his head, raising an eyebrow as he studied him. "And you, Gregor? You're awfully quiet." The warrior flinched, and his friends exchanged knowing glances.
"Looks like the dragon can't take his eyes off his bride," Broderick teased.
Gregor clenched his jaw. "I knew her before," he admitted. Shock registered on their faces.
"What?"
Callum asked, incredulous. Gregor gave them a brief version of their story, leaving his friends stunned. "And you agreed to marry her?" Broderick asked. "I thought about refusing," Gregor admitted.
"But now?"
Callum narrowed his eyes. "Are you getting attached to her?" Gregor's silence was all the answer they needed. His gaze instinctively searched for Eilidh. And at that moment, he caught her looking at him.
But she quickly looked away.
"Do you still love her?" Dougal asked bluntly. Gregor shifted uncomfortably.
"You're insane."
"With that look it seemed like you wanted to devour her," Dougal pressed. Gregor scoffed and downed his drink. "You're insane if you think that." Angus smirked. "So, what are you going to do?" For the first time that night, Gregor's lips curled into a wicked smile. I'm going to make her time in this castle a living hell. Until she begs James to break the engagement. At that moment King James rose to his feet and turned to his host. I believe this gathering could use some merriment. Let us dance. Gregor frowned. Lord Mackenzie, why don't you take your future wife for a dance? The murmurs died instantly. Eilidh paled. Gregor's smile was laced with icy malice. I suppose my dear betrothed won't mind dancing with me. Eilidh clenched her fists. She refused to give him the satisfaction of rejecting him, so she lifted her chin and strode toward him with unwavering determination. As their hands met in the dance, the tension between them became almost unbearable. They both feigned indifference, but the history they shared, woven from love and wounds, throbbed between their intertwined fingers. The dialogue between Gregor and Eilidh. The touch of Gregor's hand on her skin still lingered like an echo in Eilidh's memory. She never thought such a simple gesture could stir so much within her, awakening emotions she believed long buried. Yet there they were, swirling in her chest like a storm she couldn't ignore. She hated herself for it. Hated that her heart insisted on returning to the past, to what once was. She couldn't allow herself to fall for him again. Gregor hated her, that much was certain.
But what about her?
Had she ever truly forgotten? Had she ever stopped loving him? After the ball, Eilidh sought refuge in the shadows of the garden. The music and laughter faded behind her, carried away by the wind whispering through the rose bushes. She wandered aimlessly, letting the cool air soothe the turmoil of emotions stirring in her chest. In that secluded corner she thought for a moment she had found the solitude she needed, until she saw him standing there, half hidden in the dark. Before she could hold herself back, the words slipped out in a low, tense murmur. For someone who doesn't want to see me, you seem to be following me. The voice she least expected broke the stillness of the night. Eilidh forced herself not to flinch, but anyone could see how much his mere presence unsettled her. She lifted her gaze and saw him approaching, his face and torso bathed in the moonlight. Gregor's piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, scrutinizing, trying to decipher her. A flush burned Eilidh's cheeks as she realized how intimate the scene seemed, how the space between them suddenly felt dangerous. She forced herself to respond, clearing her throat to find her voice.
Not everything revolves around you, dragon.
The last word carried a barely concealed mockery. She had heard them call him that during dinner, and it seemed a fitting way to remind him she wasn't afraid. Gregor smiled, and his expression was so dazzling that Eilidh's legs nearly gave way beneath her. She was grateful to be sitting because otherwise, she might have lost her balance. That smile, the same one she remembered from long ago, the same one she had loved. And yet, seeing it again shattered her heart. She hadn't realized how much she missed that part of him, the carefree ease with which Gregor had once faced life, as if nothing could ever truly shake him. She swallowed hard, forcing down the ache rising in her chest just as Gregor spoke again. Years ago, on a night like this, I truly got to know a woman. Eilidh clenched her fists in her lap and averted her gaze. She couldn't hold his stare. Because she remembered that night all too well. It had been the last time they held each other, the last time they kissed, the last time everything was right between them. And also the night when everything fell apart. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat tightened with the tears she refused to shed. She bowed her head, hoping the darkness would hide her turmoil. Well. I'm surprised you don't have that viper's tongue you showed me that day at the shores of Loch Ness. His words struck her like a blow straight to the heart. Eilidh clenched her jaw, battling the wave of pain.
But she couldn't let him humiliate her like this.
Everything she had done was to protect him, to keep her father from killing him. And yet her pride kept her from saying so. She rose to her feet, her back so rigid she looked as if she might break at any moment. She stepped close enough for him to feel the heat of her glare. I wouldn't be so sure, Gregor. Her words lashed like a whip.
You know nothing about me.
You have no idea what my life has been like, so you have no right to judge. Gregor studied her, tilting his head slightly. He shrugged with feigned indifference, but a flicker of regret darkened his features. Maybe not, he admitted. But I was talking about you, not your life. Eilean almost walked away, but she forced herself to stay. She needed to quiet the storm inside her, even if only with a few words. She stepped closer, stopping just a meter from him. From there she could smell the scent of heather on his skin. Gregor looked startled by her boldness, his fists clenching as if he were fighting some instinct. I understand why you hate me because I would hate me too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I ask you not to judge me. You can't ask me for anything, Gregor murmured, his gaze dropping against his will to her lips.
Not after everything you said.
Eilean exhaled slowly, the breath thick with bitterness.
That's right.
I forget I never had the right to speak about anything, she said with a sad smile. Do you still want to go through with this? Gregor nodded, his voice rough with something he refused to name. Of course. When I give my word, I keep it. Though you wouldn't know what that means. He regretted it the instant the words left his lips. Eilean blinked, her eyes suddenly glassy with unshed tears. Gregor felt something twist in his chest, but before he could say anything she whispered. I hate you, Gregor MacKenzie. Her voice broke. I hate you for not having the courage to stand up to my father and come for me. And without giving him a chance to respond, she turned and disappeared into the night. Gregor watched her vanish into the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't understand her words. He didn't understand anything. But something told him that beneath Eilidh's coldness lay a story he had yet to uncover. And worst of all, he had just realized, he had never truly forgotten her. Chapter 6. The conflict between Eilean and Gregor. Dawn arrived shrouded in clouds, with the constant threat of rain. Eilean gazed out the window, feeling as though the weather mirrored her exact state of mind, dark and stormy. She had barely slept, and when she finally did, nightmares had plagued her without mercy. Her marriage, her father's cruel words, but most of all Gregor's eyes before their final goodbye returned again and again to torment her. She looked at herself in the mirror before leaving her room, and noticed the dark circles beneath her eyes. She didn't care what anyone might say about her appearance. After all, she had already heard the worst from Gregor the night before. With a sigh, she stepped out of her chamber and descended the stairs, making sure to avoid anyone she wished not to see. Her new friends were waiting in the small sitting room, where they usually gathered before breakfast. The night before, during dinner, she had discovered she was not the only one who opposed the king's wishes. As soon as she entered, they all knew something was wrong. Are you all right? Annabelle asked, concerned. Eilean sighed and shook her head. She couldn't lie to them, and deep down she needed to unburden herself.
Not really, she admitted, sitting beside Rose.
The latter took her hand gently, and offered a reassuring smile. Do you want to tell us? We're here for each other. Eilean nodded slowly, and after taking a deep breath she began to speak. Do you remember that I stepped outside after the dance last night? They all nodded in unison. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting next to him throughout dinner, so I went out to the courtyard and sat on the garden bench. Marjorie leaned forward, intrigued. And? Did some warrior try to get fresh with you? She asked, always ready for a fight. No. But Gregor came out and joined me. Agnes scoffed and glanced at Marjorie. I think we've found the perfect target for dagger practice. Annabelle smiled, but Eilean shook her head. I don't want any more trouble. But he's hurting you. Your eyes say as much, Rose interjected. Eilean lowered her gaze, struggling to hold back tears. It's true that he wasn't exactly kind to me last night, but I did the same to him years ago. I told him terrible things I never meant. The words began to spill from her lips, in an uncontrollable torrent. I loved him, and I wanted to marry him, but my father wouldn't allow it because he was a warrior. When he caught us together, he beat me until I was nearly unconscious. Then he forced me to pack my things, and threatened to kill Gregor if I didn't leave him. So the next day, when Gregor came to stop us, I had to say the worst things imaginable so he wouldn't follow me. Since then he's hated me, and I understand why.
But I had no other choice.
A sob escaped her, and Agnes knelt before her, taking her hands firmly.
You did the right thing to save him. But now he hates me.
Because he doesn't know the truth, Annabel pointed out. Maybe if you told him.
Never.
Eilidh cut in sharply. I don't want him to change his opinion of me just because he knows. If he ever loved me, he should have realized my words weren't truly mine. But he didn't, and because of him, I was forced to marry a man who mistreated me. There's no point in speaking of the past now. The damage is done. But you still love him, Rose whispered. Eilidh met her gaze and with tears brimming in her eyes nodded. And would you want him to love you again? Marjorie asked with a mischievous smile. Eilidh nodded once more, and Marjorie leaned in, whispering something in her ear. Her words startled Eilidh, but what unsettled her even more was the confidence with which she spoke, as if she possessed vast experience with men. Yet the most disturbing thing of all was the feeling that someone else had been listening in secret. From afar, hidden in the shadows of the corridor, Finlay had heard enough. Moving silently, he slipped away before he could be discovered, vowing to give Gregor the time he needed to understand the truth. But if he saw his friend teetering on the edge of the abyss, he would step in before it was too late. Chapter 7. The clash of swords echoed through the air. What had started as mere training had escalated into something far more intense, an unspoken battle of pride and rivalry. The warriors fought with relentless focus, oblivious to their surroundings, until a powerful clear voice cut through the chaos like a thunderclap. Enough! The warriors froze instantly, as if the heavens themselves had commanded them to cease. They turned toward the young woman who had interrupted their fight, startled by her sudden intervention. Until that moment, they hadn't realized they had an audience. Gregor turned as well, his breath heavy and his brow furrowed. When his gaze met Eilidh's, a strange shiver ran down his spine. Her expression was unreadable, though the flush on her cheeks made her look like the most tempting vision he had ever seen. He cleared his throat, uneasy, and shifted his attention to Agnes, who was glaring at them both as if they had lost their minds.
You're acting like children.
Agnes snapped, crossing her arms. Do you not see that James could use your petty disputes to his advantage? Angus smirked and stepped toward her.
What's the matter, redhead?
Worried about me? Agnes raised an eyebrow and scoffed, irritation flashing in her eyes.
Yes, but only because I'd rather be the one to take you down.
Angus tilted his head, his smirk turning into something far more dangerous. He closed the distance between them, until barely a meter separated them. Agnes held her ground, though the slight pink in her cheeks betrayed her.
We'll see about that, redhead.
Eilidh cleared her throat, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the growing tension between her friend and her betrothed. She averted her gaze, only to find Gregor watching her intently. As if taking a page from Angus's game, the warrior advanced toward her with a slow, predatory stride, like a wolf closing in on its prey. Instinctively she smoothed a hand over her skirts, though there was no wrinkle to fix. From the look on your face one might think you're worried, Gregor murmured, his voice low and teasing. Eilidh swallowed hard, forcing herself not to glance at the wound bleeding at his side. Instead she smiled with the same carefree ease Marjorie had advised. Of course I am, she replied, gesturing toward Lachlan with feigned nonchalance. I noticed you've wounded the Laird Drummond several times. Gregor's frown deepened, caught off guard by her response. He cast a quick glance at Lachlan, who stood a few paces away, before turning back to Eilidh, his expression darkening. You're worried about Lachlan Drummond? He asked, disbelief in his voice. Eilidh knew at once she had struck a nerve. Naturally. He's been quite kind to me since I arrived at the castle. A shadow flickered across Gregor's blue eyes. Anger and jealousy sparked in his gaze, though he tried not to let it show. But Eilidh saw the shift, and she had to fight back a triumphant smile. Marjorie had been right, Gregor was annoyed. His jaw clenched so tightly that his teeth ground together. He couldn't believe what he was hearing from Eilean, not after how she had rejected him in the past. But he would make sure she regretted those words. "I should go clean my wound," he said suddenly, taking a step toward the castle. Then with a slow, calculated smile, he glanced at her over his shoulder and added, "I believe the healer is unavailable at the moment, so my betrothed will have to tend to me." A furious shiver ran through Eilean's body. She wanted to refuse, but if she did, he would win. Pressing her lips together, she followed him in silence, glaring daggers at his back. Gregor, for his part, smiled in smug satisfaction. The walk to the castle was thick with tension. Gregor moved with the confidence of a man who knew he had the upper hand, while Eilean kept her posture rigid, resisting the urge to wound him as deeply as he was humiliating her now. As they entered the great hall, she started searching for a suitable place to tend to him, but Gregor spoke before she could react. "It would be best to do this in my chambers. I have clean shirts there." Eilean blinked, momentarily speechless. She opened her mouth once, then twice, before straightening her spine and meeting his gaze defiantly. "Fine." As she climbed the stairs behind him, she glared at his back, suppressing the urge to shove him just to see him stumble. Gregor, however, was thoroughly enjoying himself. It was a small act of revenge, but he intended to savor it. When they stepped inside his chamber and the door shut behind them, a chill ran down Eilean's spine. She knew Gregor meant to make her pay for her words, and the worst part was that despite her anger, a part of her was desperate to find out exactly how he would do it. Eilean nearly dropped not only the water but also the entire basin when she saw Gregor with his shirt almost undone. His broad, firm chest left her breathless. He was watching her intently, barely blinking, as if trying to anticipate her every move. She forced herself to blink and look away, gripping the basin tightly in a desperate attempt to steady the sudden pounding of her heart. Clearing her throat, she tried to buy herself some time. "What are you doing?" she dared to ask, her voice barely controlled. Gregor wasted no time responding, his gaze playful. There was a familiar glint in his eyes, the same one she had known long ago. It was as if he made a point to show it every time he stood before her, as if his only goal was to drive her mad over everything she had missed in his absence.
"You don't expect to treat my wound with my shirt on, do you?"
he murmured teasingly. Eilean cursed herself for her clumsiness. Her question had only served to reveal her own nervousness at the sight of his bare chest.
"What's the matter?"
"Don't you like what you see?" Gregor added, with a provocative edge. Eilean's eyes widened at his audacity. How dare he? Her mind screamed at her to throw the water at him for being so insolent, but a part of her heart responded in a completely different way. Seeing the spark of triumph in Gregor's gaze, Eilean tightened her grip on the basin, lifted her chin proudly and retorted,
"It's not so different from others I've seen."
Gregor's smirk vanished instantly. His expression darkened with a flicker of uncertainty. Questions crowded his mind. Had Eilean been with other men? Had she fallen in love, after leaving the shores of Loch Ness? And what if she was still in love with someone else? The thought suffocated him, but he shoved it aside. He forced himself to focus on the sting of his wound, rather than the torment of imagining Eilean's life away from him. He sat in the chair by the fireplace, silent, waiting for her to do her work. He didn't want her to touch him, didn't want to feel her hands on his skin, but it was too late. Eilean had already knelt beside him, a damp cloth in hand, and began cleaning the wound. When the cold water met his skin, Gregor hissed in pain, and Eilean immediately pulled back. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you," she apologized, meeting his gaze. Gregor held her stare, and what he saw struck him deeper than the pain of his injury, the sorrow she had carried all these years. He shrugged, his voice barely above a whisper. "A little late for that." Her stomach twisted at his words, but she forced herself to focus on her task. She cleaned, disinfected, and bandaged his wound with meticulous care, trying not to think about the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, the firmness of his muscles, or the way her own body reacted to him, as if time had never passed, as if nothing had changed. When she tied the last knot in the bandage, she let out a quiet breath and forced herself to look at him. "I'm done," she said, willing her voice to remain steady. Gregor blinked, as if shaking off a trance. He shifted slightly and to both their surprise murmured, "Thank you." Eilean stared at him in shock. She hadn't expected gratitude from him. Quickly she stood and smoothed her dress, unsure of what to do.
"It's nothing," she replied coolly. "It's not the first wound I've treated."
Gregor clenched his fists at the thought of other men receiving her care. "Have you treated many like this?" he asked, his voice laced with jealousy. Eilean shrugged, uneasy. "More or less. I've had many similar wounds myself." Gregor frowned.
"What did you just say?"
The slip made her shudder. She stumbled over her words, unable to answer, and turned toward the door to escape before Gregor could piece together the truth about her life after she had left him.
But she didn't get far.
His fingers closed around her wrist, forcing her to turn back to him. "Who hurt you?" Gregor demanded, his voice low and controlled.
"What does it matter now?" she shot back, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears.
"It matters to me," Gregor admitted, surprising even himself. Eilean swallowed hard. There was no mockery in his gaze, no disdain, only barely contained fury.
But she couldn't tell him the truth.
With a sharp tug she freed herself and rushed toward the door. "It's none of your concern," she declared before slipping out. Gregor remained motionless, feeling anger and helplessness coil inside him. Outside, Eilean walked away with a heavy heart, swearing to herself that Gregor MacKenzie would never again make her doubt her strength. But deep down, she feared it was a promise she wouldn't be able to keep. Chapter 8. The hallways were deserted, and for a moment Gregor feared he had arrived late for dinner. However, as he descended the stairs, he encountered one of the king's men, Eilean Drummond, the very same man he had crossed swords with that morning. The warrior was surprised to see Eilean at his side, but his surprise quickly turned into amusement when she smiled at him. To Gregor's own astonishment, the young woman offered her arm to Eilean, choosing him as her escort for dinner. She was certain that when Gregor saw her entering with him, demons would consume him from the inside. "Lord Eilean," she said with innocent sweetness. "How are you after your injuries?" Eilean raised his eyebrows, visibly surprised that she had spoken to him. A sly smile curved his lips. "Lady MacLeod," he exclaimed with feigned courtesy.
"I had just noticed your beauty tonight."
"Thank you, Lord Eilean. I am perfectly well. Your betrothed couldn't bring me down, even if he had an entire regiment at his side." Eilean smiled, though his comment sparked an inexplicable anger in her. Nevertheless, she clung to his arm with familiarity and said, "Would you mind accompanying me to the hall and sitting with us? I am sure you have many interesting stories to share." Eilean tried to mask his surprise, but he couldn't prevent the grin that spread across his face at the thought of Gregor's reaction. Without hesitation, he offered his arm and nodded.
"It would be an honor, my lady."
With each step toward the hall, Eilean wavered in her decision. She was merely following Marjorie's advice to provoke Gregor's jealousy, especially after what had happened in her chamber. However, when the voices in the hall rose upon seeing them enter together, she knew her plan had worked. Murmurs rippled through the room as every gaze fell upon them, Ian, her friends, the warriors, and finally Gregor. He gripped his utensils so tightly his knuckles turned white. A pang of unease struck Eilean, as she realized Eilean was heading straight for the empty seats across from Gregor. To make matters worse, they had been the last to arrive, making their entrance all the more conspicuous. As she passed by Rose, her friend raised an eyebrow in a silent promise of endless questions later. Eilean gave her a shaky smile and moved forward, praying that Eilean wouldn't sit too close to them. But her prayers went unanswered. "Lady MacLeod," said James, his voice laced with barely concealed tension. "I hope your headache has passed." Eilean nodded with a forced smile. "Of course." Despite her polite tone, irritation bubbled within her. Was it necessary to mention her discomfort in front of everyone? Nervously, she freed her arm from Eilean's and took her seat. Gregor was watching her, as if he wanted to drive his knife straight through her companion. "I hope you don't mind me sitting beside you, Lady MacLeod," said Lachlan, dropping into the chair before she could respond. Eilidh hesitated but shook her head. "Of course not." A lie. She felt uneasy, though she tried to remind herself why she had invited him. Yet when her gaze met Gregor's, she knew she had made a mistake.
"Well, Lachlan," Gregor said, his tone icy.
"I thought you would sit with your own, and curl up beneath James's kilt." Lachlan smirked with disdain, ignoring the venom in his words. "Oh, Mackenzie. You know I'm not one of those. I much prefer sitting beside your betrothed. She strikes me as an extraordinary woman, worthy of admiration." Gregor shot him a look that promised war. Eilidh shifted in her seat, wondering at what point she had lost control of the situation. "But you're going to be just as bored as I am at this dinner," Callum interjected, trying to ease the tension. "My betrothed isn't here, and these people bore me." Lachlan shrugged. "I insist on staying. I would like to continue my conversation with Lady MacLeod." Gregor let out a low growl, dropping his utensils with such force that the clatter echoed through the hall. Eilidh flinched.
"What's the matter, Mackenzie?
Don't you like your friend Ian McRae's food?" Lachlan taunted. Gregor scoffed. "Why don't you mind your own life, Lachlan? It must be so sad and empty that you've envied me for years." Lachlan let out a booming laugh, slamming his fist on the table. "Mackenzie, how could I possibly envy you when you live in the shadow of your laird?" Gregor made a move to stand, but Callum held him back. "Don't fall into his trap," he murmured. "He wants to make you look bad in front of the king." Gregor clenched his fists, breathing deeply to restrain himself. But when Lachlan spoke his next words, the air at the table turned to ice. Chapter 9. Eilidh endured Lachlan's entire conversation stoically, though she had no interest in what he was saying. Still, she responded and smiled while he spoke, as he had barely given her a minute to say anything herself. Every so often she glanced at Gregor, and noticed the anger etched on his face. In part it pleased her, this was what she had intended, but at the same time she wished the warrior would put an end to Lachlan's monopolized conversation, as it was beginning to exhaust her. However, she never imagined the conversation would take such a drastic turn with a single question from James's warrior, words that made everything around her spin too fast. "If I'm not mistaken, you were married once, weren't you?" Eilidh felt the last traces of color drain from her face. A shiver ran down her spine, and she told herself she had to stay strong if she didn't want to faint right then and there. It wasn't something she had tried to hide, but she hadn't wanted Gregor to find out so soon, and certainly not like this. She lifted her gaze abruptly, locking eyes with Gregor, hoping he hadn't heard. But the shock reflected on his face told her he had been listening to every word. She saw no judgment in him, yet she judged herself, and her father who had forced her into marriage. In the depths of Gregor's blue eyes she saw countless questions flicker, and she lacked the strength to answer them. She turned to Lachlan, who was smirking almost maliciously, and her hands began to tremble at the thought of having to respond. Silence was her only answer, while the clinking of her utensils against the plate betrayed her nerves. From the corner of her eye she noticed Gregor and Callum watching her, until finally, realizing she was struggling, they came to her aid. "Lachlan, why don't you mind your own business?" Callum asked lazily. The man attempted to respond, but at that moment James stood and captured everyone's attention. "I am pleased to see such unity among those gathered here," said the king, to the warrior's surprise, as they raised an eyebrow. "I would like to offer a toast to all of you, for aiding my predecessor, and for accepting my reward, not only for yourselves," he gestured to the men before turning to the young women, "but for your fathers who fought alongside us long ago." James continued his speech, but Eilidh barely registered his words. Her focus remained fixed on Gregor, on those piercing blue eyes that scrutinized her as if trying to unravel her thoughts. She barely managed to react when she saw everyone lifting their cups for the toast, forcing herself to do the same so as not to offend the king. At that moment Lachlan stood and moved to sit beside James, something Eilidh wished he had done before making his remark. She watched as Callum turned his attention to Dougal's conversation, sitting on her other side. Gregor, however, remained silent, saying nothing after hearing one of her deepest secrets. Eilidh wondered if the warrior would reject her before they were even wed, now that he knew she would not come to his bed as a pure woman. She wanted to ask him then and there, despite being surrounded by people, but the words caught in her throat. Feeling his gaze fixed on her, her eyes welled up with tears. She tried to look away before Gregor could notice, but she knew it was too late when his expression shifted upon seeing her. Unable to endure another minute in the air that had suddenly turned stifling in her lungs, Eilidh stood, and all but fled toward the door in search of fresh air. When she finally breathed in the cold of the corridor, a sob escaped her throat, and she told herself it would be best to retreat to her chamber. She didn't want to see anyone, or offer any explanations. She quickened her pace, determined to reach the stairs as soon as possible, but just as she was about to step onto the first stair, a firm hand grasped her wrist. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Gregor's scent enveloped her before he even spoke. "I don't think running away is the best option," he said. Eilidh turned to him, looking at him through her tears. "I'm not running away. I just feel unwell," she replied. Gregor gave a faint smile, and unable to resist, wiped away the tear that trailed down her cheek. "I'd prefer if you let me go," she said, gesturing slightly toward the hand that held her. Gregor studied her and obeyed, though there was a trace of reluctance in his movement, as if fearing she would pull away again. But Eilidh remained, torn between fleeing and staying, until Gregor finally broke the silence with a serious voice.
"Let's take a walk and talk."
Eilidh hesitated for what felt like an eternity, but when she saw the silent plea in the warrior's blue eyes, she finally nodded. Without another word, they walked out of the castle together, under the moonlight, ready to face the past that had separated them, and the destiny that now bound them once more. Learning to listen without fear. For years Gregor had clung to his pain like a shield, convinced that Eilidh's betrayal had been undeniable, unquestionable. The story he had told himself had been clear, leaving no room for nuance. But now, with her standing before him, with the truth trembling on her lips, he realized he had never given her the chance to explain. Not because he hadn't wanted to hear her, but because he had feared what he might discover. What if his resentment had been unjust? What if, by listening to her, he realized he had wasted years in bitterness? He took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch between them. For the first time he was willing to listen, not to reply but to understand. Eilidh let out a soft gasp at Gregor's touch, her skin shivering under the unexpected contact. A whirlwind of emotions surged within her, a mixture of longing and vulnerability that made her cling to him even more, seeking the warmth she so desperately needed. However, the moment ended as abruptly as it had begun, when a voice cut through the darkness, forcing them apart. "Who's there?" Gregor pulled away as if burned, and before Eilidh could release the startled cry that was about to escape her lips, he covered her mouth with his hand. Heart pounding, he pressed a finger to his lips, silently urging her to stay quiet. His eyes darted toward the shadow descending from the top of the wall, a torch flickering in the night. "Lachlan?" Gregor asked innocently, recognizing the warrior. "Is that you?" The man stopped and raised the torch, casting a wavering glow over the scene. He regarded Gregor with a questioning look, his brow arching as a smirk spread across his face. From his elevated position, with straw scattered across the ground, he could only make out Gregor, who seemed to be leaning against the bales in a rather peculiar posture. "Mackenzie!" Lachlan called out.
"What the hell are you doing here?"
"Weren't you supposed to be at dinner?" "Yeah, but I was about to kill Lachlan and needed some fresh air," Gregor replied with a sly grin, locking eyes with the warrior. Lachlan moved the torch closer in an attempt to get a better look, but the height prevented him from seeing clearly. Still, his instincts told him something was off. His keen gaze swept over Gregor, and a teasing smile curved his lips. "You didn't come here for something else, did you?" he asked, his tone laced with mockery. Gregor let out a laugh. "Of course. I was thinking about you the whole time. Lachlan wrinkled his nose in distaste and shook his head, rolling his eyes. I hope we can test our strength in training soon, he called as he walked back toward the wall. You know I'd defeat you in any fight, Gregor replied smugly. Lachlan scoffed, his shadow vanishing into the night. Only when Gregor was certain he was gone, did he remove his hand from Eilidh's lips. She stared at him intently. She hadn't made a single sound, yet he seemed reluctant to break the contact. At last he stepped back, and Eilidh immediately felt the loss, as if the night's chill seeped through her all at once. Her skin, which had burned with incandescent warmth just moments before, slowly turned cold again. We should go back, Gregor murmured. Eilidh nodded silently, unable to form a single word. They made their way back to the castle without speaking, but the stolen glances between them revealed the thoughts swirling in their minds. Neither of them could ignore what had just happened. Chapter 10. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm golden glow across the room, Eilidh woke with an unusual sense of peace. For the first time in years, she had slept without fear, without the darkness bringing painful memories or lingering anxieties. She dressed with care, choosing a deep blue gown with a square neckline that accentuated the brightness of her eyes and the golden cascade of her hair. She decided to leave it loose, free of adornments. Just as she was about to set her comb down on the table, a soft knock sounded at the door. It was a hesitant tap, almost cautious, as if afraid to wake her or disturb her peace. Eilidh crossed the room with uncertain steps and slowly opened the door. Gregor stood on the other side, dressed in a newer kilt than usual, his hair neatly combed, something she immediately noticed. He regarded her with a trace of unease and cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable under her scrutiny. Good morning, Eilidh greeted, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks as the events of the previous night rushed back to her. Gregor smiled slightly and nodded. Good morning, he echoed.
I thought you might like to go for a walk before breakfast.
The men have gathered to complain about their betrothed, but I have no interest in that sort of talk. Eilidh smirked in amusement. You don't want to join them and complain about yours? Gregor shrugged, his expression revealing more than he was willing to admit.
Yesterday perhaps.
But today let's just say things have changed. Eilidh let out a spontaneous laugh, light and carefree, and Gregor's heart pounded faster at the sound. For a brief moment, he was transported back to those days by the river, when her laughter had been the most beautiful sound he knew. Don't stop, he murmured, almost without realizing it.
Stop what? She asked, intrigued. Laughing.
Gregor averted his gaze and cleared his throat, feeling exposed. A strange heat crept up the back of his neck, and he had to make a conscious effort not to rub his jaw, his usual nervous habit. He wasn't accustomed to feeling vulnerable, much less to someone like Eilidh being the cause of it.
So, do you want to take that walk?
Eilidh studied him for a moment before nodding, unable to hide her smile.
Let me grab my cloak and we'll go.
The uncontrollable passion of Gregor and Eilidh. Some battles weren't fought with swords but with the soul. Gregor and Eilidh had sworn to resist, to cling to honor as a shield against desire. But the body and heart had memories, and there were passions that didn't care for loyalty or betrayal. In the intimacy of a stolen moment, when the weight of duty dissolved in the touch of a familiar skin, they discovered that their struggle was not against each other but against themselves. Because how could one fight something that was as much a part of them as the blood running through their veins? No matter how many times they tried to deny it, fate kept finding its way back to them, reminding them that they weren't always the masters of their own longings. The morning sun shone brightly over the river's surface, making the water sparkle with golden flashes. Eilidh barely had time to understand what was happening, before Gregor disappeared beneath the water, leaving behind a swirl of bubbles. Her heart tightened, and a lump formed in her throat. She was about to let out a sigh of relief when Gregor's head reappeared, but his playful expression faded when he saw the terror on the young woman's face. Gregor, she shouted, taking a step forward without caring that the hem of her dress got soaked. The warrior disappeared again, only to resurface moments later, gasping for air. Eilidh, help me. She opened her mouth several times, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. Her hands flew to the laces of her dress, unsure whether to strip it off to dive in and rescue him or run to the castle for help. Eilidh! Gregor shouted again, his urgency making her skin crawl. If this is a joke, it's not funny. The warrior flailed his arms desperately, and before she could react, he vanished under the water once more. Eilidh waited a few seconds, holding her breath, but the river began to calm, and to her horror, Gregor didn't resurface. Damn it, she muttered, tugging at the laces clumsily until she almost tore them.
Why the hell did you have to go into the water?
When she was down to her chemise, she dove into the river without hesitation. A scream escaped her throat as the icy cold enveloped her, but she ignored it as she swam toward the spot where Gregor had disappeared. Gregor! Her voice trembled with desperation.
No, please.
Gregor! Silence was her only response until she felt something grip her foot, and in an instant she was dragged toward the depths. She let out a strangled cry before the water fully covered her, but before panic could take over, strong hands gripped her hips and propelled her back toward the surface. Eilidh gasped, taking a deep breath as she emerged. She was still blinking in disbelief when she heard Gregor's laughter. She fixed her gaze on him, feeling the fury rise within her.
Was that some kind of damn joke? She muttered through gritted teeth.
It was the best way to get you into the water, he said with a mischievous smile, unable to stop himself from moving closer to her, his gaze fixed on her lips with undisguised desire. Eilidh, however, wasn't in the mood for games. At that moment, she didn't want to kiss him, she wanted to strangle him for playing such a prank. She tried to pull away, but Gregor surrounded her with his arms so firmly that she could barely move.
You're a disgusting worm, Gregor MacKenzie.
I thought you were drowning. The warrior laughed again, and Eilidh felt his laughter reverberate through her body. Despite her anger, she couldn't help but notice how her heart was racing, being so close to him. Were you worried about me? Gregor asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Eilidh stood still. She had spoken without thinking, and now found herself trapped by her own words. However, seeing the satisfied expression on the warrior's face, she frowned. The only thing I was worried about was getting wet and cold, she retorted, lifting her chin. Gregor smiled and pulled her closer. So, are you cold? He whispered in a husky voice. Eilidh swallowed hard. The air between them grew heavy. Gregor wasn't just looking at her eyes, but at her lips too. The cold from the water had disappeared, replaced by a scorching heat that ran through her body.
Why yes, she stammered.
So, I'm going back to the castle to change. I'd say you've stopped shivering. Gregor murmured, leaning in until his lips barely brushed hers.
And that you actually want me to kiss you.
Eilidh closed her eyes for a moment. She counted the seconds until Gregor closed the tiny gap between them and kissed her again. But a voice interrupted the moment. Mackenzie. Did you go out for some fresh air today too? Lachlan asked with a mocking smile from the shore. Eilidh immediately submerged, trying to hide in the water. Gregor growled, shooting a murderous look at his friend.
What the hell do you want, Lachlan?
Your friend's looking for you. He wants to speak with you before the king's men invade us again like this castle is theirs. Gregor grunted and nodded.
I'll be right there.
Lachlan smiled maliciously. I'll tell Ian you'll be there in 5 minutes. I suppose by then you'll have finished freshening up. Go to hell, Lachlan Drummond, Gregor growled, splashing water at him, though it didn't come close to hitting him. Lachlan walked away laughing, while Eilidh raised an eyebrow at him. Looks like he always knows where to find you. Gregor smiled and kissed her briefly. We have to go, but I hope you don't forget that we still have unfinished business. Eilidh shook her head, knowing she would never forget what had happened in the river. They spoke with their hearts laid bare. The fear of not being believed was an old companion. For so long her truth had been silenced by others, and now the weight of the years and the wounds threatened to drown her before she could say a word. But Gregor had been there looking at her, and in his eyes there had been something she hadn't expected, the possibility of being heard. She couldn't control her response, couldn't force him to forgive her, but she could do something she had never done before with him: trust. She had spoken without expecting a result, without seeking his love or his anger, but simply opened her soul. Because the truth didn't only belong to the one who spoke it, but also to the one willing to receive it. Confessions in the Highlands. Gregor's footsteps echoed against the stone floor as he approached the designated hall. It had taken him longer than expected to arrive. After his bath in the river, he had to return to his chamber, change into dry clothes, and groom himself just enough to appear presentable before his friends. He didn't want them to notice the shift in his relationship with Eilidh since the day before. He had parted ways with her before reaching his quarters, yet the mere memory of what had happened in the river stirred a deep longing within him. He reminded himself to calm down and focus on the conversation ahead. From the corridor, he could hear laughter and murmurs. As he pushed the door open and closed it behind him, he knew Lachlan had already spoken. "Looks like your bath in the river lasted longer than expected," Dougal teased. "I hope at least it helped cool you down," Angus added with a sly grin. Gregor huffed. If Lachlan had told them everything, he needed to brace himself for an onslaught of mockery. Pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey, he took a seat beside Finlay, who wasn't laughing but whose eyes betrayed his amusement. "Are you going to laugh too?" Gregor asked with resignation. "Me? Laugh?" Finlay replied with feigned innocence. Ian clapped him on the shoulder and raised his glass in a toast. "My friend, I'm glad to hear your relationship with your betrothed is improving." At no point did I say anything had changed, Gregor attempted to deny. "You didn't, but Lachlan did," Ian pointed out with a smirk. Gregor clenched his jaw and shot a warning glare at the man in question. "One day I'll cut your balls off," he threatened, earning a burst of laughter from Ian.
"It wasn't just him," Callum interjected.
"Last night, you left the dinner in the middle of it to go after her. You should have seen James's face when you walked out." Broderick nodded, amused. "Shame I can't draw."
"That would have made a fine portrait," he muttered.
Gregor rolled his eyes. "Did you drag me here just to ask what happened?" "Well, after Lachlan told us you were acting strange and alone in the courtyard last night, we figured there was more to the story," Finlay said. Gregor sighed, knowing he wouldn't escape their questions. He looked at each of his friends and finally spoke. "Fine. Yesterday morning, after the fight with the king's men, Eilidh was the one who treated the wound Lachlan gave me. During our conversation, she let slip that she'd had similar injuries before but wouldn't tell me who had caused them. Later, during dinner, Lachlan suggested that Eilidh had been married. James never mentioned it to me, so I assumed he chose to omit that detail when he introduced us." Finlay grunted.
"He tends to have those kinds of oversights."
"When I saw her leave the hall, I followed her and asked if it was her father or her husband who had hurt her.
She told me everything."
Silence settled over the room until Finlay spoke again, his voice indifferent. "So now you know everything she told you before leaving the shores of Loch Ness was a lie." Gregor's eyes widened before narrowing in outrage.
"You knew?"
Finlay cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "I overheard them talking, in one of the castle's chambers." "Do you make a habit of eavesdropping on women's conversations?" Broderick mocked. Finlay grunted and shook his head. "I was looking for Marjorie, to convince her not to castrate me the next time she saw me. The door was ajar, and they were speaking too loudly. It's not like I hid to listen, they simply didn't close the door." "Of course, sure," Angus drawled. "No one would ever think you're a gossip." Gregor ignored him and turned back to Finlay.
"What else did you hear?" "That she left you because her father didn't want her with you. That she said those awful things because she was forced to."
"And that?" "And what?" they all asked in unison. "Marjorie advised her to make you jealous." Gregor frowned. "Excuse me." Eilidh said she still loved you but that you hated her. So Marjorie told her to provoke your jealousy, to make you realize what you felt. I suppose that's why she showed up with Lachlan last night. Gregor scoffed. Part of him was furious that Eilidh had agreed to such a scheme. Yet, knowing she did it because she still loved him, dispelled every other emotion. Are you going to do something about it? Callum asked. If you're asking whether I'll return the favor with a charade of my own, the answer is no.
But do you still love her?
Angus asked bluntly. Gregor felt his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer, but his own reaction to Lachlan, and the memory of Eilean in the river told him everything he needed to know. He clenched his fists and sighed. God help me and give me strength, because I don't think I ever stopped loving her. Chapter 11. Eilidh gazed at her friend's face with a mix of concern and resignation. Despite everything she knew about the warrior Eilidh MacLeod, she had never wanted to say anything to Cecily. She knew all too well her friend's loyalty and how much the truth could shatter her. Cecily was a good person and deserved to be surrounded by people like her, but James had undoubtedly made a poor choice in selecting his betrothed. Have you thought about asking James to reconsider? Eilidh asked after a few moments of silence. Cecily sighed and shrugged bitterly. Do you really think he'd listen to me? Marjorie tried to make her fiancé pay for what he did, and nothing happened. It won't be any different for me. He's the king, and we have to obey him, she said with resignation. Then she waved a hand dismissively, pushing the subject away.
But this afternoon isn't about Neve.
It's about what we're about to witness. Who do you think will lose? Eilidh smiled faintly, welcoming the change of topic. Honestly, I hope the king's men lose because I don't like any of them. Cecily burst into laughter, amused by her friend's bluntness. And what about Lachlan Drummond? He sat beside you last night. Eilidh scoffed, frowning at the memory. Don't remind me. I only did it because Marjorie convinced me it would make Gregor jealous, but it was a mistake. Cecily arched a mischievous brow.
But from what I've heard, it worked.
Or is it a lie that you were seen together at the river? Eilidh rolled her eyes. I think the Laird of Eilean Donan should tell one of his men to keep his mouth shut. He's a blabbermouth, she complained, making her friend laugh again as they made their way to the courtyard where the others awaited them. The benches were arranged at a safe distance from the designated combat area. As they settled in, Eilidh glanced around but didn't see Gregor among the gathered crowd. She assumed the warriors were still preparing. If you're looking for him, he hasn't arrived yet, Annabel murmured beside her. The young woman turned to her and sank onto the bench next to her friend. Are you going to ask about the river too? Eilidh asked with mock resignation. Annabel smirked playfully.
Well, it's all anyone has been talking about this morning.
Some of the servants mentioned it before breakfast, and I couldn't help but overhear. Eilidh chuckled and shook her head. She didn't mind. In fact, if the entire castle was buzzing about what had happened at the river, perhaps the rumor would bring Gregor closer instead of pushing him away. And just then she saw him emerge. Something stirred in her stomach at the sight of him. Gregor exuded such confidence and strength that the urge to run to him, to embrace and kiss him, was nearly unbearable. His dark hair rippled in the wind, but what surprised her most was the sight of the right side of his hair braided, just like the ancient Vikings who had once visited these shores. The dragon had returned, and in mere moments she would witness the warrior within him. A shiver ran down her spine, though she chose to blame it on the weather. The sky threatened a storm, and the strong scent of damp earth filled her lungs as she took a deep breath. She had always loved that scent. It reminded her of home, and the moments she had shared with Gregor by the river near her former laird's castle. From across the courtyard, Gregor locked his piercing blue gaze on her, and offered a brief smile, sending a tremor through her. It took every ounce of willpower not to move from the bench, not to run to him like an eager child. The creak of the castle doors opening drew her attention. The rest of the warriors had finally emerged. Marjorie and Agnes scoffed at the sight, prompting Eilidh to laugh.
"What have they done to make you hate them so much?" she asked, amused.
Marjorie arched a brow and glanced at Agnes, who let out a heavy sigh. "Exist. Isn't that enough?" Eilidh laughed again. "A few days ago you had the same look on your face as us," Agnes reminded her with a teasing tone. Eilidh shrugged.
"Well, if I changed my mind, nothing's stopping you from doing the same."
"With the Campbells?" Marjorie asked incredulously. "With the Frasers?" Agnes added at the same time. Rose offered a timid smile. "I can't help but feel afraid when Dougal looks at me, but you two are brave. Like them." "And that's the problem," Agnes muttered. "It'll be much harder to cut off a certain part of their anatomy, if they get too close." Annabel and Eilidh burst into laughter. "Or could it be that deep down, you feel something for them?" Eilidh asked slyly. Marjorie's face tensed into an unreadable expression, while Agnes scowled in indignation. Before they could respond, Eilidh pointed ahead. "James is arriving with his men." They all fell silent, turning their gazes toward the approaching figures. From their vantage point, they could hear the king's orders clearly. "And I repeat, I expect you to set aside your differences," he declared firmly. Gregor averted his gaze, and his friends did the same, though Eilidh could have sworn she heard Angus huff impatiently, eager to face Alistair Buchanan once more. "If war were to break out tomorrow, you would fight on the same side," James continued. "It's time you learned to tolerate each other." "Fine," Gregor responded through gritted teeth, seeing that the others remained silent. James smiled in satisfaction. "Perfect, gentlemen. Let's begin." Eilidh caught the gleam in the king's eyes. He looked excited, like a child with a new toy. Gregor glanced at his friends, an odd knot forming in his stomach. He longed for battle, yet something told him this afternoon would not end well. With a sigh, he unsheathed his sword, cast one last glance at the woman who stole his breath, and braced himself for the chaos about to unfold. Chapter 12. Duel and Honor. The training yard was stained with blood and sweat, a silent witness to the fierce battle that had taken place. More than half an hour had passed since the first clash of swords, and by now, more than one warrior would carry a scar as a reminder. Gregor and his men showcased their superiority with the blade, effortlessly dominating James's soldiers. But the most gripping fight was the one unfolding between the king himself and Ian McCrae. From her seat, Eilidh, though not entirely versed in the art of swordplay, had the distinct impression that the lord of the castle was allowing himself to be bested by the king. James had attempted to impose a change of opponents every 5 minutes, but in the end, each warrior inevitably sought out the one he despised the most, resulting in more than just practice wounds. Gregor, for his part, kept his gaze locked on Lachlan, the simmering rage within him intensifying every time he recalled the man's interest in Eilidh. Though he tried to convince himself that she had only used Lachlan to play along with her ruse, he knew that for Lachlan, it had been anything but a game. "Admit it, Lachlan, I'm a far better warrior than you," Gregor taunted, his sword gleaming under the sunlight. "I was raised and trained alongside the devil himself." Lachlan scoffed dismissively. "And yet that didn't help you keep Eilidh in the past, did it?" The words struck Gregor like a blow to the gut. His grip on his weapon tightened as his jaw clenched. He knew exactly what Lachlan was referring to, the day Eilidh had left him. What he couldn't fathom was how the man even knew about it.
"Surprised that I know, Mackenzie?"
"I have ears in many places. That's the advantage of being close to the king." Gregor took a deep breath, forcing himself to rein in the rage surging through him.
"At least I've had something with her," he rasped.
"You never had anything." Lachlan's attack came fast and furious, but Gregor was ready. Dodging the strike with ease, he twisted his sword and slashed a clean cut across Lachlan's thigh. "At this rate, Lachlan, you'll have quite a few reminders of me on your skin." The wounded man gritted his teeth but smirked nonetheless. His eyes flickered toward Eilidh, who was watching the exchange with unease. Perhaps I'll leave my own mark on something of yours, he murmured, licking his lips. Something snapped inside Gregor. He no longer cared about the sword, or the so-called rules of the duel. With a furious growl he flung his weapon aside and lunged at Lachlan, using only his fists. From her seat, Eilidh watched as the fight spiraled into something deeply personal. Her pulse quickened, and she began wringing her hands anxiously. She wanted it to be over, but James, far from stopping it, seemed to be enjoying the show. Is it just me, or is this getting interesting? Agnes quipped, though the concern in her voice was evident. I'm sorry, but I can't watch this anymore, Eilidh murmured before rising and heading toward the castle. Before disappearing into the corridors she caught one last glimpse, Lachlan pushing himself up from the ground and landing a punch squarely on Gregor's face. She shut her eyes and kept walking. She couldn't bear to witness more senseless violence. She only hoped Gregor wouldn't be as badly hurt as she feared. The fights continued for another 10 minutes before James finally ordered a halt. His soldiers were battered and bloodied, while Gregor's men looked barely worse for wear. Gentlemen, did I not make it clear this was meant to be a mere distraction? James scolded. Gregor glanced at his companions, who struggled to hide their amusement. My lord, I mean no disrespect, but I believe it was your men who failed to grasp that they needed to defend themselves, he replied with a slight bow of his head. Lachlan let out a frustrated growl, and made to lunge at Gregor again, but Alistair held him back. James sighed, scanning the warriors before him. I expect these petty rivalries to end here. If war were to break out tomorrow, you would be fighting on the same side. I did not bring you together, so you could kill each other. Gregor barely listened. His gaze swept over the place where Eilidh had been seated, but she was gone. Every other woman was still present. His brows furrowed. Where had she gone? Had watching the fight made her unwell? He resolved to find her as soon as he had the chance. You may leave and have your wounds tended to, James continued. But you, he pointed at Gregor and his men, stay. I have matters to discuss regarding what happened here. Gregor suppressed a sigh. He glanced sideways toward the interior of the castle, yearning to find Eilidh and make sure she was okay.
But he would have to wait.
However, his unease would only grow, for the woman he longed to protect was in the kitchens, facing an even greater danger.